Good evening. I'm Town Board Member Kimmy Romeo, and I'm here tonight on behalf of Supervisor Dave Seeley and the rest of the Town Board. I'm pleased to welcome you to the first public meeting for the local Waterfront Revitalization Program update. This is an exciting and important planning opportunity for our town. As you may or may not already know, our current LWRP, you're going to hear that a few times tonight, was adopted in 1988. A lot has changed in 30 years. This policy planning effort will allow us to consider and refine the vision for Irondequoit's waterfront areas, which is one of Irondequoit's greatest assets. Thank you in advance for your participation and your input tonight. Thank you for coming out and sharing this process. I'd also like to thank our presenters tonight, because it's nothing like coming out on a kind of a cold, wet January evening to share with us. So thank you for being here. I'm going to turn this over now to Carrie Ivers, our Director of Community Development. Carrie.
Thank you, Councilwoman Romeo. I'm Carrie Ivers, and I'm pleased to kick off this official planning effort, partly because it's planning, and that's really one of my my true loves when it comes to community development, and because it's such an important document. It's really a guiding document for the town, and it will help to identify priorities and establish a framework for future investment and development practices. This is a project that was funded through a grant that we received from the New York State Department of State, and the entire process, as our project team will guide you in, is really related to a very prescribed planning process. I'm pleased to introduce Matt Ingalls with Ingalls Planning and Design. They're going to be helping us throughout this planning effort, and we're really looking forward to it. Thanks. Matt?
Great, thank you, Carrie. Put my coffee back there so I don't spill it. Well, thanks for everybody coming out tonight. We're going to give you an overview of what an LWRP is, touch on a little bit about what's been done this far, and talk a little bit about the existing LWRP. But before we get into that, I just want to let you know there's an agenda over there. They'll take you through. We have about an hour scheduled for the presentation. It might take a little bit less, and then we'll take some, question and answers. But at the bottom of this, if you have to step out early and you want to leave a comment, there's an opportunity to write whatever you want to write at the bottom of this, and leave it with either Andy or I, and we'll make sure that we get those in with the other comments. So we're going to skip over the agenda here and talk a little bit about the planning process and the schedule. And we'll get into a little bit about what the LWRP is, or the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. So the LWRP planning process, which we're kicking off tonight with this first public meeting, includes several tasks that you'll see here on the screen. These tasks are actually part of a program that the Department of State works out with each municipality. So you're probably looking at this and wondering why we started with Task 5. The first 4 tasks are things that the town and the Department of State actually work out as part of their program and contractual agreement that they have associated with the grant that they received. So we came in at Task 5 with the preparation of the subcontract and assisting the town in developing and updating the local waterfront revitalization program. We had a kickoff meeting with a waterfront advisory committee right before the holidays. And then you can see in Tasks 6 and 7, we've started work on a preparation of a community outreach plan, which includes this meeting here today. And then also a draft Section 1, which is the waterfront revitalization area boundary. As Carrie had mentioned, the LWRP process is very prescribed by the Department of State. They call it their work program. So as you'll see, that these tasks don't vary a lot from community to community. They're very prescribed, and you'll see like Section 1 is the boundary and Section 2 is the inventory and analysis. That's all dictated by the Department of State as part of their program. So these sections that are included in the local waterfront revitalization program, we don't have any flexibility over those. We just have discretion in terms of what goes in those, but not actually moving those around or adding different sections. Off to the left-hand side, you'll see where are we now, where do we want to go, and how do we get there. Those are just three fundamental questions that we as planners through the planning process are looking to answer. So sometimes it's nice to be able to kind of keep the big picture in mind here and say, you know what, we have all these tasks, we have all of these meetings that we need to do, and we have all these sections of the LWRP, but what are we ultimately trying to do? And really what it boils down to is answering these three fundamental questions. So what we try to do is link those tasks with answering those questions, and that will help us kind of keep the big picture in mind as we move through the process. And then as we move through the planning process, we'll tackle these other tasks, and you'll see that task 13 is another public meeting, and then down also in task 19, there's also another public meeting. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a few minutes. In terms of our schedule, we kicked it off in December with the first meeting with the Waterfront Advisory Committee. And we are anticipating a draft update to the program in end of the summer, early fall timeframe. There's a lot of review in here by the Department of State. Each section has to be sent to the Department of State for review, and they get feedback. So depending on the timeline and how backed up the Department of State is, sometimes those review processes can fluctuate a little bit. So we have to kind of take that with a grain of salt, and sometimes that impacts our schedule a little bit. So we anticipate having a draft by the end of the summer, early fall, and then it will go through the final review process with the Department of State. So a little bit about the background and how we got here. As Carrie had mentioned, in 1988, there was an LWRP. That was the first and only LWRP that the town of Irondequoit did. And then there was also a small update that really didn't get finalized in 2008. So the existing LWRP was adopted, and it's still in effect today. It was prepared alongside the towns of Webster and Penfield, which makes a lot of sense because all three towns share the Irondequoit Bay. So Webster approved theirs in 1998, and then Penfield approved theirs in 1991. So within 1988, and when town of Irondequoit finalized its LWRP, it took about 10 years later for the town of Webster to approve theirs, and then Penfield also did an update to theirs in 2015. At that same time, in 2008 timeframe, all three towns looked to do another joint update together. Penfield's is really the only one that took that to completion. So the town of Irondequoit finished section 1, the revitalization area boundaries, with some minor updates from 1998. In section 2, the inventory and analysis was updated. And then some of the policies in section 3, the local waterfront revitalization policies, were updated. But for a number of reasons, it just, at that point, just didn't gain any traction, and it wasn't updated all the way through. Whereas the town of Penfield, a few years after that, in 2015, completed that update. So town of Penfield updated their plan in 2015. Town of Webster has not updated theirs. They started the update in 2008 but didn't complete it, and the same thing with Irondequoit. So what's nice about that is that we are here today, and we're actually working from a lot of those updates that were done in 2008 up to 2014. So there are some things that were updated. We're going to talk about the boundary here. There were some boundary modifications that were drafted, and also some of the inventory and analysis that was drafted that we can still use. So let's step back and think about and talk a little bit about what an LWRP is and actually what it's not. So for those of you that don't know what a local waterfront revitalization program is, it comes from the Coastal Areas Inland Waterways Act that offers local governments the opportunity to participate in the state's coastal management program. So the state coastal management program is really a program that manages all the coastal waterways in New York State. And one of the ways that they do that is through the local waterfront revitalization program. So it's passed down through the act from the federal government to the local states, and then from the state it passes it down to the local governments to be able to participate in this program. So a local waterfront revitalization program is a locally prepared land and water use plan for a community develop natural, public, and working waterfront. It provides a comprehensive framework within which a community's vision for its waterfront can be formalized. So much like a comprehensive plan that covers the entire community, this is similar in nature, but it only impacts or only covers the waterfront areas. So it's working in partnership with the Department of State to come to a consensus and agreement on what should happen within that waterfront area. So when you think about the benefits, and what are the benefits of an LWRP? Well, one is state and federal consistency. So one thing it's a big benefit of an LWRP is that once it's actually approved by the Department of State and federal agencies, anything that happens within that local waterfront revitalization area, both state and federal agencies as well as local actions need to be consistent with it. So this consistency provision is a strong tool that helps ensure all government levels work in unison to build a stronger economy and a healthier environment within the waterfront area. Another thing it does is it builds consensus around a common vision for the waterfront. It can significantly increase the community's ability to attract appropriate development and in respect to its unique cultural and natural characteristics. A third benefit is it offers technical assistance from the Department of State on issues that come up within the waterfront area. They can be environmental issues or land use issues, zoning and land development issues that the Department of State can assist local communities with. And then it also increases the community's chance to obtain public and private funding for projects. This is one of the biggest benefits that's changed significantly since the 1988 adopted plan, is that now most of the grant programs that are available through the consolidated funding application, which is the vehicle which the New York State actually rolls out their grant programs, when a community actually applies for a grant through the consolidated funding application, it actually asks whether or not the community has an adopted local waterfront revitalization program. And if it does, it gets extra points on the scoring of those projects and those applications. And that fund is typically from the New York State Environmental Protection Fund and other sources. So what does it mean for you in terms of whether you're in the boundary or you're not in the boundary and how that might impact you? Well, if you're not within the waterfront boundary that we're going to talk about here in a minute, it really doesn't have a significant or direct impact as a property owner. If you are within the boundary, then what happens is that actions within the LWRP boundary require consistency review. So this consistency review is part of the adoption process of the local waterfront revitalization program. So when we get to the end and we have this document that's updated, then everything that happens within, not everything, but most actions, significant actions that happen within that waterfront area have to go through a review process at the local level to make sure that it's consistent with the local waterfront revitalization policies and projects. So what does that mean? Well, an action is defined in the law, but it's really the construction of any activities that may really impact or significantly impact the natural, man-made, or other resources in the waterfront area, and the environmental and also potential environmental impacts of that. So they can be directly undertaken by an agency. They may involve funding by an agency, or they might require one or more or new modified approval, permits, or review from an agency. So really, if an agency has taken an action within the LWRP area, it needs to have go through consistency review and make sure it's consistent with the local waterfront revitalization program. If a project is being funded by one of those agencies, state or federal agencies, then it also needs to go through the consistency review program. The one distinction here is they define minor actions within the law. Minor actions are not applicable. In other words, they are not subject to consistency review. And really, most of those minor actions are anything that you can think of, for the most part, to do with residential improvements. So if you want to repair a deck or put a deck on your home, or additions, those types of things, they would fall within the minor actions and are not part of the consistency review. So they really wouldn't impact most property owners. The exception is if the property is within the coastal erosion hazard area, and then that law actually kicks in, which basically requires that you can't, if something happens to a home, if you can't expand a home within that coastal erosion hazard area. So what it basically boils down to is if you have if there's an agency that wants to, expand a project or take a project on within the waterfront area, then it would require consistency review. If there's funding from an agency for a project within the area, it would require consistency review. But then most minor actions, which include most residential projects, would not be subject to that consistency review. So let's talk a little bit about the existing boundary and the proposed boundary for the local waterfront revitalization area. You can see on the map that this, I know it's kind of hard to see, and maybe Nate's zooming in here, but there's actually a black dotted line in this area right here, and then this area over along Irondequoit Bay. That black dotted line represents the existing LWRP boundary that was part of the program and is still part of the program from 1988. The only proposed changes, there's actually three areas. These two areas along the lake, one of the provisions that the Department of State provides communities and actually encourages communities is to extend that boundary up to 1,500 feet out into the waterway. That way, you can actually have some management tools that will help manage water surface use and things like that within that area. So that's one area that we're proposing to change that's identified by the blue line here. And then the other significant one is really along the Genesee River corridor that really doesn't involve too much of what was referred to as the flats area. It's primarily that narrow area along the corridor. So to sum it up, the only changes that we're proposing to make is the 1,500 feet extension out into Lake Ontario, and then this change here. And there is a little piece right here that the existing boundary runs along the rail right-of-way, the old rail right-of-way, and then we're just proposing to pull that out to the street along this section. So those are really the only two lines, the areas that are changing. So going back to that consistency review, if you fall within these areas, this entire boundary area, and then assuming those restrictions or those conditions that we just talked about in terms of federal, state agencies and funding, it would actually be required consistency review, but residential properties within those areas, unless it's a significant change in the environmental impacts of the waterfront area, then there would be no consistency review. So along with some of the benefits that go with the Waterfront Revitalization Program, one is actually, as I mentioned, developing a community-based vision. So that can mean a lot of different things. Section 4 in the plan talks about future land use and projects. So that's one of the things that we'll be developing as we move through this process, is updating that section of the plan, Section 4. So I just wanted to share some of the ideas and some of the things that have come out of local waterfront revitalization programs in other communities, just so you get an idea of some of those things that can actually be funded and that have been funded. Before we do that, there's three fundamental components of kind of waterfront planning. This is something the Department of State feels strongly about, and one of the objectives of their coastal management program, certainly along with the environmental protection, but trying to encourage the use of the waterfront with water-enhanced uses. So when we think about water-enhanced uses, those are uses that benefit from a waterfront location, but don't necessarily require a waterfront location. So this could be waterfront restaurants, and we certainly have some here in Irondequoit. There's scenic views and vistas. There's overlooks. Those types of things all would fall within the water-enhanced uses. The water-dependent uses actually require a waterfront location for them to exist. So a marina or a boat launch would certainly be a water-dependent use because it couldn't actually exist without being on the waterfront. And then the third piece of it is public access to the water. So they certainly are encouraging to maintain public access to the water and expand public access to the water when possible. And then when physical access is not possible, then certainly maintaining and enhancing visual access is also important. So as we go through the LWRP process, part of the inventory and analysis is evaluating some of these. Where are the physical public access points? Where are the visual important views and vistas, so that way we make sure that we can preserve those and enhance those when possible. So things like the marina that we see in the Port of Rochester, that was a project that was funded partially through the Department of State and the Environmental Protection Fund, and having a local waterfront revitalization program in place, which the city of Rochester does have a local waterfront revitalization program. They just updated their program, I think, 2 years ago. And I think they had their existing program was around the same time that Irondequoit updated that one. I think it was in 1991. So waterfront trails are certainly part of projects that can be funded through the Department of State and the local waterfront revitalization program. Promenades like the one in Cornhill is another one. Master planning projects, this was in the city of Geneva on Seneca Lake that was funded, and the city of Geneva also has a local waterfront revitalization program. Blueway trail plans, or trail plans that actually happen on the water, are another thing that can actually be funded through that. I know the one that's probably closest to us is probably Cuga Lake and the Finger Lakes, just recently updated or prepared a Blueway trail plan. Visitors centers that bring people and welcome people to the waterfront are projects that can be funded through that, such as Geneva's Visitor and Event Center. Public access points, whether they be promenades or piers or formalized public access points that either improvements to existing ones or adding new ones. Waterfront revitalization, there's a lot of projects in the village in the town of Clayton, for instance. The Harbor Hotel and the improvements that were made along the lakefront up there were part of that process, and were funded through the Department of State, as well as you see in the bottom of these slides. There's not just the DOS or the Department of State. There's a lot of other programs that can piggyback on the Department of State's program to help fund projects that were identified or have been identified in a local waterfront revitalization program. Downtown revitalization efforts that have close proximity, so even places like Seabreeze here in Irondequoit, or other small commercial neighborhoods that are important to the waterfront or have a history of being important to the waterfront, are certainly eligible for things like that. They can include streetscape improvements or direct improvements on the waterfront. Another example is the Opera House. If anybody's been to the village of Clayton, the Opera House in Clayton was part of that, just off the waterfront. That waterfront, that's another thing that we want to just mention in terms of the local waterfront revitalization area boundary. And that's why along the Irondequoit Bay it extends all the way out to what was originally 590, is anything that has an important proximity to the waterfront can usually be pulled into that. It's not just the area or the land that just borders the water, but actually pulls out into it. So like Seabreeze would certainly fall within that as well. Water quality projects and other environmental projects can be part of that. Stream restoration projects, beaches and things like that can also fall within that category. Jamestown, for instance, did a tourism and branding about their downtown area and their waterfront, and that was partially funded through the Department of State. Kayak launches and boat launches are certainly projects that are attractive for DOS funding. Well, I hope that gave you a quick idea or an overview of what the local waterfront revitalization program is, a little bit about what the boundary is and the process that we're going to go through to update each section of the plan and the timing that the program and the planning process is going to take. So our next steps is to take any feedback on the boundary tonight, and then we'll make some revisions to that boundary if necessary. We have to finish updating the text that goes along with that boundary, and then we'll be sending it off to the Department of State for review. We'll continue our efforts in update in the inventory and analysis, which is section 2. And we have some good things to work with based on that previous update that was partially updated back in 2008, between 2008 and 2014. And then we'll also have another community meeting, number 2, following an update to the draft policies, the section 3, and then the proposed land and water uses. So look for another public meeting back in probably mid summer, probably July or August. And then also make sure you check the town's website for any updates on the planning process. I know that the town is talking about making a page on there, and then we'll be posting stuff as things are prepared. So again, thank you very much. If you have any comments that you want to leave with us, feel free to jot them down, and then you can leave them with Andy or I. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this special event coverage on ICAT Government Access.